Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael, the boss man, Byrd.
I like that. Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. Our guest today is our friend and client, Clint Carnell. Clint's the CEO of both the HydraFacial company and OrangeTwist.
You know, I'm really excited to talk to Clint. He has an awesome story. He has so much insight in the aesthetic industry. And typically, when we record a podcast, it's always great to have the guests live in studio with us. But that was 2019. So once again, we'll be recording this episode via Zoom. And Michael, I bet on New Year's Eve in 2019, you could not have predicted the number of times you had said the word Zoom in 2020.
Oh, man, no doubt. Zoom fatigue. And I looked up some numbers on Zoom. Did you know that in December of 2019 that Zoom had an average of 10 million daily meeting participants?
All right, that sounds pretty high.
Well, 10 million is a lot unless you put it in context to April of 2020. The average meeting participants per day in April was 300 million.
All right. So I feel like I single-handedly probably combined to the growth of the number of Zoom calls, meetings, and webinars I have attended since March of 2020.
Yeah. I think we all would prefer to hear the word Zoom a little bit less. It's been a long and crazy year. The aesthetic industry has actually experienced a boom with so many people staring at themselves all day, every day. It's been called the Zoom boom. And so I'm going to formally introduce Clint so we can hear directly from someone running two businesses that are experiencing the Zoom boom. So Clint is, as I said, he's the CEO of the HydraFacial company. He's a founder and CEO of OrangeTwist. It's a chain of med spas that are all over the country, California, Nevada, Washington, Texas. I believe this to be true. I found this on the internet. He was born in Anchorage, Alaska. Is this true?
Wow.
Okay.
That's true.
Grew up in Washington, attended Duke University on a soccer scholarship, and spent his entire career in healthcare. And like us, mostly working with doctors. So we have that common thread, and started in ophthalmology and transitioned into aesthetics. And I know Clint wouldn't say this, but he's a true titan in the aesthetic space. And so, Clint, we're so excited that you could join us today.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. It's good to be with you. I heard two things during that intro, though. I heard my fees are going up because Michael's the boss man. And I heard that I'm old. That's the two things that I'm taking away from a brilliant opening. So good to see you guys.
Well, you know, we love to make our guests feel welcomed here. Well, and Clint, our theme for this season for the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto is thinking outside the box. And, we'd love for you to tell us, what, as Michael mentioned early in your career, you're in ophthalmology, and how you ultimately got into the aesthetics market.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I really, really enjoyed the show. I came out of university and was fortunate enough to get a territory in South Carolina. I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and nobody qualified would take the job. So it really was, I think I got a white Buick with blue interior, and they said, go sell something because nobody else has been able to. And I was too young and too dumb to know the difference. And so that was the start of my career. It was a IO lab, which is owned by Johnson & Johnson at the time. And really was a fantastic opportunity. It threw me at 22 years old, advising some of the world's best surgeons on how to put in intraocular lenses. So if that doesn't keep you out of the operating room, I don't know what would.
And so how long were you kind of doing that gig?
Yeah, in my 20s, I spent primarily surgical sales, Chiron bought IO lab. Then I did a small stint in finance because I didn't have a finance degree coming out of university. And that put me into a short stint as an M&A guy for Gambler Healthcare and dialysis. So I really enjoyed healthcare, but I really wanted to be on the business end, even though I'd come through a sales and marketing career. So my 20s, I'd say, was shaping up my skill sets for what put me eventually at Bausch & Lomb at 30 years old as GM and Vice President of Sales.
Wow. And then so talk about what year did you transition into the aesthetic space?
Yeah, so 2005, I came from Bausch & Lomb 2000 to 2005. I'd gone back to Bausch because it started a chain of dialysis centers, and I didn't have a paycheck. Called one of my old mentors, Tom Frenzy, and asked for a gig. Eventually, a little bit like my early career, Bausch was in a lot of trouble. Nobody qualified would take the job. So I ended up being VP of sales and ran the U.S. team, I guess, from 2002 to 2005. And really wanted to then be a CEO, was full of myself and thought, I've got the big job. I can probably do a CEO gig. And was recruited by Steve Fanning, who was just exiting OSI and was running a small company called Thermage. So that transition from ophthalmology into aesthetics was 2005.
Oh, just in time for the 2008 experience that we all got to go through.
Yeah. I zigged when I should have zagged. Is that the term? So yeah, but it was a lot of great lessons out of it, and I'm sure we'll touch on those.
Yeah, I mean, let's jump in. I loved it because I think that what we're looking for as much as anything is just to tap into those lessons learned from, there's things we can't control. We make decisions, we get into, and, in your case, the aesthetic industry, and life happens, and love to hear, a little bit about that and kind of some pivots you made along the way.
Yeah. And the older I get, I'm 50 right now, so I'm at least on the back nine or turning the corner. Resiliency is the only human characteristic I think worth beings now. And I think the older you get, as you go through these, it makes the next one easier. Probably before 2008, actually in 2001, just before 9/11 hit, I had just opened my dialysis centers. They weren't getting funded and the government shut down. My mom passed away.
Wow.
And we were under a hostel at Bausch. You got like three things and you're like 31, 32 years old. And those dark days, they're really dark. And I find that you just have to get up and, brush your teeth, make your bed, put your pants on and go to work. Because eventually we get through these things. Ironically, that made 2008 a little bit easier. I was running Thermage as the number 2 under Steve Fanning. We had just decided to acquire Fraxel, which was larger because they had missed an IPO window. And so we had, I think, combined like 800 or 900 employees. We were really excited. We were going to be a $200 million company. And the world started to fall apart before we'd even combine the companies. And as the world was falling apart, you may remember revenues plummeted. We were having to take people out of the business to save it. And the SEC, I think, approved the merger like on December 28th, right before we had to close the year. And we had a planned sales meeting for the first week of January. So every day we were meeting with the executive team, just trying to keep the business alive. But ironically, I was tougher the second crisis than the first.
And do you feel like that those experiences also kind of prepared you for life of a CEO? Because I would imagine that resiliency and ability to, because you got to lead through that as well. And I'm just wondering how those experiences prepared you.
Yeah, and look, you're both business leaders and thought leaders in space. I think people look to leadership. I always tell people, your people are only scared if the leader's scared and not communicating with confidence. I just had one of my AVPs in who I really, really respect, and he's former military. And he goes, boss, you were on the tank with a cigar saying charge pretty early in the pandemic. And I said, well, I was faking it. I was scared to death inside. And I'm, whether you're a father or a business leader or, a friend, there's times when it kind of calls upon you to lead, despite what your own reservations may be. And I think that I've learned a lot about myself in this pandemic and talking with other leaders I have as well. I've also seen people crawl up in the corner, put their thumb in their mouth, and, they don't seem like they're coming out anytime soon. So I've seen a very binary reaction during this pandemic. It's quite startling to me.
And that leads perfectly right into the fact is right now, as Michael said, you are a CEO, but not only a CEO, you're a CEO of a company that, and it's public knowledge that HydraFacial was going through a huge transition, and that as the pandemic hit and the world shut down, how can you walk us through what it's like being a CEO of what that process is and what the experiences and lessons learned that you had during this time?
You want to cry and nobody loves you because you're a CEO. I think we rank lower than the lawyers, when it comes to, public empathy.
Wow, that's terrible.
That is awful.
Yeah. At least we have Congress. It was brutal, guys. I mean, I had two companies really excited. We were on our front foot. Both were looking at going through a transaction which would have injected more cash and a brighter future. And both companies, HydraFacial, we had to furlough within days of missing the transaction. We had to furlough 85% of our employees. And that for a company that had been growing at 50% year over year, very profitable, it's just hard to explain to 380 people as you're walking out the door. And we did it within 3 hours. So, and then everybody was sheltered in place, right? So you can't even hug them because we couldn't hug. And OrangeTwist went along the same parallel path. I literally was meeting with one leadership team and then moving to the other leadership team. With OrangeTwist, we were literally shut down by the governors. And so we had to furlough everybody with a leadership team. And it was brutal. I mean, I still get a little teary-eyed thinking about it because it was just hard to explain to people. And then they were scared. We all thought we were going to die. And the media and politicians weren't helping us. So it was good. I'm really proud of both leadership teams to come out of it really strong. But it's because of those early days and how we treat our people. And
I think, as you started this episode, when you started talking about 2001, 2008, it allowed you, I think, to pivot extremely quickly because I think your ability to see unfortunately see what the tea leaves said early on that, hey, this is not going to work and we're going to have to transition and pivot right now or it's not even be there after the fact. So that's pretty impressive.
Sorry, Brad. Yeah, we were really criticized early. I mean, whenever you're in business, you have competitors, you have some frenemies, and you have true friends. So I heard the whispers from the frenemies, but I'd seen this show before in 2001. I'd seen it in 2008. It's brutal, but it's the leader's job. And I think the only thing you can control in business is your expenses. We moved quickly, and then we put the survivors back in the boat. We charted a course, and we told everybody we'd be back. And early on, our commitment at HydraFacial was we're going to employ everybody again. That's why everybody went to work, and the same thing with OrangeTwist. And I think now in reflection, a lot of people are giving us credit because both businesses are back in an extremely strong manner. And I think that could have been very different. If you make Melee's decisions on the way in, I think it's slow on the way out. So I'd say we're part of a V-shaped recovery, knock, knock, that keeps going.
Well, and I think that goes back to when we started this episode, we talked about the Zoom boom. And we've heard you talk about the fact that, aesthetics is a lifestyle choice. So tell us what you're seeing happening in the aesthetic, industry post-pandemic life.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have been in it a long time. 2005, I think, nobody understood why I left Bausch & Lomb to go to a small company called Damage, and I think we've seen a massive change in these being lifestyle choices. They were largely thought to be vanity. Now this is just part of diet and exercise. This is part of general wellness. I think the Zoom boom is real. We know that you can have 40 people on a Zoom call and you're sitting there staring at yourself. And so my friends at the golf course who are, used to think that I was, a sissy are now saying, hey, can you tell me? Because they've been looking at their crackety old ass on Zoom all day, realizing that I'm so much better looking than they are because I'm getting my HydraFacials and all the stuff done in my OrangeTwist treatment shop. So I feel it's good they caught up. We used to think the millennials were narcissistic. They were just visionary. And I think us old Xers are starting to realize that.
Well, that's true. That's why one of the reasons why, if anyone's ever, this is why we do a podcast and we don't have video, so I don't have to see my face. And that's why I always turn off my camera so I don't have to look at myself. So maybe I need to call you later, Clint, and set up an appointment.
I've been accused of having face for radio.
Well, what I'm wondering too is when you had that opportunity to be shut down, that you didn't have a choice about, and so you're staring at this dead space for the first time probably ever. Did you identify improvements operationally or otherwise in these companies that you're kind of able to capitalize on as you emerge?
Yeah, it's a great question, Michael. Yes. Both companies, probably the pandemic, we're going to look back, that's the best thing that ever happened to them because they were both on fire from a growth standpoint. I mean, with HydraFacial, we propped up and we will be the largest educator and deployer of estheticians in the world because we went full into an online learning university with bricks and mortar. We just finished the pilot. That would have taken us 2 years to get up, but we were like, this is important. We've been looking to do it. Let's do it. We have some marketing initiatives that are going to come out early in the year. We have some new products that are going to come. I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's, I think it's Concentric Circles of Influence. We're focused on what you can control and your influence expands. Those who worry about things they can't control, their influence shrinks. I was very fortunate that Denise Keeler, Paul Gaynor, and Brittany Slater, the small leadership team at OrangeTwist, they've improved that business far greater than when it went into the pandemic. And we're seeing comps of 35% year over year. It's profitable. It's got 25% EBITDA at the same store. So if you meet my two leadership teams and the employees, you'd never guess that we're still in a crisis, because they're strong. They're fighting. They're optimistic about the future, and a lot of pleasure watching them go through this and emerge much better leaders.
Yeah, and more importantly, y'all been busy, and that's, I think, when we've talked with leaders throughout this process, you not heard one of them talk about how much Netflix they've been able to watch during this pandemic. They've talked about how much more they're working to be ready for in this case, the Zoom boom or the V-shape economy or whatever you want to call it. And you're right. I think, hopefully the audience caught on. I mean, being able, what can you control? And that's what you need to concentrate on. And that's such a great takeaway.
Although I will confess that I'm hooked on The Boys on Prime Video, and it's all about wrong. I mean, it's superheroes and their dark sides, and it's like I've been doing a little bit too much binging on that, but it's I always fall asleep during it and wake up staring at the ceiling. But it's a good pacifier.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, we are so grateful, Clint, that you joined us today. What we'll do next is we'll go to commercial. We'll say goodbye to you, and then we'll come back after, and Brad and I will share some pearls kind of from a legal perspective on all of this.
Cool. Keep the faith, guys, and really excited to be part of this. And I think it's a great service you guys provide.
Take care, man.
Thank you.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to the Legal 1-2-3s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. And Michael, it was great to spend time with Clint and hear his story, but more importantly, him really start talking about, when things go bad, you have to find ways to pivot, and you really need to find ways in which you can control it and not worry about things you can't control. But I think we can kind of get in a little bit more into, some other observations, and mostly on the legal perspective.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, Clint has a background that's kind of, sales and industry side, and he, of course, is still CEO for the HydraFacial company, which is a household name now. But what we didn't talk a lot about was his role as CEO for OrangeTwist. And what's different about that is that OrangeTwist is a provider-based business, and you don't historically see the level of sophistication that we're of a Clint Carnell or private equity and private money in the provider side. Now, I'm painting with a broad brush, and I'm talking specifically in aesthetics. We've seen it most recently happen in dermatology. We saw it before that in dental, and it's been present in other provider spaces. But in aesthetics, it's been tried and failed before. Particularly, 20 years ago in plastic surgery. And then the idea of non-invasive, medical spa treatments, while those treatments have been around for a really long time, the idea of a med spa and having that kind of retail meets healthcare feel is really, in its infancy from a market perspective. And so what I think of when I listen to Clint is that, the legal issues become more sophisticated as, we talk about non-doctors owning businesses that are, at the end of the day, they're practicing medicine, even though these are non-invasive treatments. And when you have big money coming in, they're bringing their traditional business practices to the table, which, they're trying to protect their investments. And so there's a lot to unpack there as we think about, how do you apply this private money, this level of sophistication to the, medical spa space or even the provider space. And kind of one additional data point I want to share is that in the last 3 months, I've had more calls about plastic surgery practices turning into or being acquired by private equity than I probably had the prior 2 years combined. And I've had those conversations both with private equity investors looking for counsel on how to structure it, and with practices who are seriously considering it and wanting to be on the front end of that. And so, and the issues are the same. They're very similar, whether it's a surgical plastic surgery practice or a medical spa. The basic foundational structural element is that these are all set up, for the most part, under the management services organization model, the MSO model. And this is familiar to many people in aesthetics. It's used often. It just tends to be used when the doctor has, one of their key injectors or one of their family members that are investing into the business, or other friends and family, not with real kind of big boy money like we're talking about here. And so observation number one from that structure is just to understand that with the more sophisticated money, the need to have your structure in place and kind of the T's crossed and the I's dotted becomes more important. And they're going to be, looking at everything. They're going to look at, is the MSO set up right? How's the money moving? How is the medical entity, which is the other part of this model, how is that set up? And how what are the boundaries on, both from an accounting perspective, and from, kind of underlying contracts and people. And so, it raises the stakes on how you run your business and the type of model that you need to be in. And then I'll add this. You and I speak all the time to doctors, to surgeons on planning their exit plan. And in fact, we just gave the most recent version a few weeks ago for ASPS. And we have our own fun names for the plans. And one of the new plans that we didn't bother kind of, sharing with plastic surgeons because it hasn't been a deal is what we call the Gecko plan. So Brad, tell us all, why is it the Gecko plan?
So for those who remember, there's a movie that came out in the 80s or late 80s, early 90s, and then came back out again. I guess they had a remake about 5 or 10 years, but Gordon Gecko is a character in a movie called Wall Street. Yeah. And so he has a lot of fun lines that, greed is good and other things. So we just kind of had fun with it, calling it the Gecko plan, because it was all about Wall Street coming in and acquiring physician practices.
Blue Oyster loves Anacott Steel.
Okay, that's way too inside the baseball.
Yes. So anyway, the idea of this other plan is that plastic surgeons are now having to consider this as a possible way that they exit their practice and understand, become educated on what that means, because it's what I just talked about having your ducks in a row from a structure perspective, but it's also understanding, what does this look like? This is typically the idea behind the Gecko plan is that a private equity is going to come in and they're going to acquire your practice. And the real bet is that they're going to give you equity in a big MSO that they're rolling up a bunch of practices in, and that you're going to have a big exit event, 5 years down the line when they have, 100 practices under management, and to understand the benefits and the risks that go with that type of model.
Yeah. And I also add in, he kind of talked a little bit about this, but, in reality, a lot of these plans eventually will need to get investors in it. Either private equity is going to come in and buy you, or you're going to have to bring people into it. And we've talked about this before, and I think season 1, episode 6 with Fast Cars Bottle Service in Jail with Jerry Arrow, and I think in episode 8 with the Unicorn Life with Jim Stanford, that because there's security laws involved and because we have healthcare laws involved, you have to be really careful about understanding when you are selling your business, either partially or otherwise, that you're actually entering into two different legal worlds with the private securities and healthcare laws. And so anyone who's interested in stepping into that space, no matter what, if you are going to have someone invest in your entity, your MSO, or you want to bring investors into your MSO, is you have to really protect yourself from future claims. And that's going to be that you're going to have to really think through on your own due diligence of discovering what your holes are and being able to disclose that to your potential investors. Those investors, hey, if I give you my dollar, Michael, I want to know, what do I get in return for that dollar? How much ownership do I get? Or am I getting potential options down the road? And then you have to tell me, what do you plan to do with that money once I give it to you? And then with the healthcare industry, Michael, you were kind of talking about the corporate practice of medicine, which probably could spend 45 minutes alone just talking about that statement by itself. But there's a lot of risk involved in any industry, but the healthcare, because of all the regulations and rules, it's especially heightened. And so as you get these monies from these different individuals, you need to be very careful about, what am I going to be using with these supplies? Am I going to be going out and buying more equipment? Am I buying more practices? And, it can't be, invest in me, and then I'm going to take my private jet to Vegas and spend it in casinos, which we don't know anything about that, Michael, at all, right?
That might be season 3 when we talk about.
But, and so as you progress, and then, if you're on the outside looking in, the same things come to, like, hey, I'm thinking about investing in this MSO. You need to conduct your due diligence the same way, understand how the cash flow is being moved from place to place, understand whether they understand, if they're in the healthcare industry, all the rules and regulations surround it. So there's a lot of pieces that are like, I always say, when I have a deal come across my desk that says we have to close real fast, those make me very nervous, especially if you don't know all the moving pieces.
Yeah, hurry up is usually a bad sign. And by the way, Brad, the message I'm getting from every single doctor that I'm talking to on these private equity deals is that the private equity is pressuring them to hurry, that they want to be at the front of the line and the first ones in because they're going to get the best deal, which maybe they'll get a better deal, but they should be, because they're taking more risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, I love having Clint on today, and I think that he had a lot of great wisdom, and I'm glad we get to spend that time with him today.
Yeah, it's great.
Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.